Hi. Right, we're gonna start shortly. Hi everyone. We're just gonna wait a few more minutes and then we can make a start. Oh, thank you, Nami. Nama. I hope I got pronounced your name right. Can you hear me alright? So, if you just joined, yeah, please leave a comment and tell us where you're coming from and watching this. Amazing. Right, we'll make a start in 3 minutes or so. Thank you, David. Where are you guys from? Oh, how lovely. So you're in Canada right now? Cool. Alright, welcome. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to make a start, and then people who joined late can actually just replay and then go back from the start if they wanted to. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm Conrad. For those who don't know me, I've been shooting fashion and beauty for about 3.5, 4 years now. And as if you've seen my Instagram, this is not my main job. I work in hospital, but this is kind of my hobby, and it's kind of got a bit, to a better standard as I went along. So I never went to photography classes or schools or university. All the stuff I've learned really is from learning from YouTube, which is amazing. You can learn everything on YouTube nowadays. So I'm going to go through what my retouching kind of workflow is, and then my retouching techniques, etc. I mean, there's lots of different techniques and workflows out there. I guess it's kind of working watching lots of videos, seeing a lot of different people do different things, try and error, and then eventually coming up with your own workflow that suits you best. So in terms of software, I mainly use Lightroom, Capture One, and Photoshop. I used to use a lot of Lightroom, but I've actually recently switched to using Capture One Pro, because for tethered shoots you can shoot in sessions, and it just feels much easier for me to kind of transfer the images from one computer to another. So I'm going to go through some of my older shoots, some of my older editorials. So I think we'll try and pick one from here to edit. There's one of my older editorials, probably done, I think it was like last year sometime. So this is in Lightroom 5, and I've already culled some of the pictures, and I've kind of picked these from, you can pick this at the end of the shoot. I think what I'm looking for really is, this is kind of a beauty shoot, but with fashion as well, so you want to get a bit of mixture of both. And obviously there's jewellery inside, you want to make sure that you capture both of that as well in your picture. So picking the picture, kind of, you have to think about what the aim is for really, and how it's going to be presented. So you can see the crop on between these two pictures. For example, straight up from camera is actually a different crop to what you'd see in a magazine crop. So you've got to always be aware of that when you are shooting. So just leave yourself enough space when you shoot, and when you crop, then you have more freedom to play around with different cropping at the end. So I've been looking through this a bit earlier, and I think I quite like this image here, because I think this image actually is a bit damaged, it's corrupted on my hard drive, but I think with the crop that I'm going to go for, it's going to be slightly cropped in anyway, so it's going to be not a huge problem. But you can see that my aspect ratio is 8.5 by 11, which is quite commonly what you see in magazines when they print. So if you do shoot tethered, you can actually set this crop as you shoot, then you can actually see what your results are like on the spot. But if I show you how it looked like right at the start, this was pretty much the setting straight out the camera, and then basically I've increased a bit of the contrast, slightly of the exposure, bit of the shadows, and increase some of the whites. Because once you increase a bit of the shadows, you lose a bit of the vibrancy of the picture. So I always tend to put a little bit more vibrancy, but that's because this makeup look is actually quite vibrant, so it kind of makes sense to me to do that. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, make sure you feel free to ask any questions as I go through my retouching. Happy to answer anything. Alright, so obviously after you've made your fine adjustments from this, then you would go and right click on it and then go export, and then you get the options of how you want to export it. If you're going to be editing in Photoshop, then I recommend that you just go straight into image format of Photoshop. And I always try to edit in a 16-bit because it's more depth you can edit. So I already exported it already, so we'll show you. Alright, so that's the Photoshop file that's been exported. So I do like try to do what we call non-destructive editing, because then you got the chance of going backwards if you need, and saving, you don't lose any specific chance of going back and re-editing if you need. So I always make a copy first of the background. Okay, and then the first thing I tend to do is have a look at the picture and see what I need to tackle. So as a beauty shot, it needs to be quite detailed. You can see a lot of the skin texture already on here, and what I'm really looking at is try to make the skin as smooth as possible without overdoing it, because you want to maintain all the texture there really. And this model's already got very good skin, etc., so won't be very much to do. But you know, in terms of editing time wise, beauty editing can take a lot of time, depending on how big a format you're going to print it. You know, you want to pay a lot of attention to each small bit. Alright, so now we've got my background copy, so I'm going to start by using my heel brush. So you can see here, it's always good to learn your shortcuts on your keyboard, because it just speeds things up rather than having to move your mouse to change your settings. So spacebar is, you hold your spacebar and you can actually drag the picture. Z for me is my zoom in and out, and then J goes back to healing. And then you've got your open bracket and close bracket to change the size of your brushes. Okay. So with the heel brush, you press Alt and then you can pick a point where you want to copy that texture, and then you simply just paste it on. So I tend to start, I mean, you all develop your own system of doing it, so I always start with on the forehead and then work my way down. In that sense, then you don't kind of miss bits, I suppose. Again, I tend to like zooming in and out, so you don't get too focused on one area. And sometimes if your printing format isn't too big anyway, then you don't really need to go into massive detail into your healing or dodge and burn later on. Can you guys hear me alright as well? Brilliant. So you can see already up on the forehead, not done a huge amount, but you can actually see, you know, when I toggle the layer on and off, you can actually see that this area already is cleaned up. It's a matter of not overdoing things, so you know, lines underneath the eyes, they're natural, you see, so you don't really want to retouch everything, just something. It's important just to know what looks natural and what's not. Yeah, I think the internet connection is a little bit annoying on the weekends. Now, one little trick that I find that you can, if your image is quite bright already, you can actually get a layer. So you just go to adjustment, you can go to a curve layer, and you can just drag it down on the lower end. And what that does is actually just, now you can see it's quite dark in the picture, but what that's doing is just helping your eyes when you're editing, that actually all the details now show up, but you can see once that's taken off, it's not as obvious. So this actually helps me spot areas of looking for places to edit. I think, thank Christine for your question. So the question was, you know, as from a makeup artist's point of view, is there any common mistake that they make that could make my life harder? Yes, I mean, obviously makeup, you have a lot of the things you want to get right on the day, So things that are quite hard to change, obviously, like I'd say if the blending is not right, so there's missing patches, for example, on the makeup, then it can be challenging to retouch. Sometimes you've got to look at the skin tone as well. I don't know how you do your makeup in natural light or with a lamp or something like that. Some makeup can become too white, and it just doesn't look right in after, when you put it on the computer. So that's why tethering, when you shoot tethering, it actually helps, because you can actually see the immediate results of what the skin color toning is like, because the back of the camera is not always that accurate. When you put it onto the computer, it can look a bit different. But yeah, a little bit of details. Actually, the other thing that's very hard to edit in terms of from a makeup point of view is if you're using makeup that's a bit more powdery and they're kind of splashed all over the face, and you have to go back and retouch every single little dot, then that can take a lot of time. But yeah, so it's always best to see what your photographer does normally. During the shoot, it's always good to have a look and review what your pictures are like. Does that answer your question? So sometimes I do like looking at really detailed stuff. You can see these little dots here. I mean, it's going to be very minor anyway, but I just like to, now I can see it, might as well get rid of it. Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, tethering, it's quite difficult to do tethering on location. For example, you need main supply for laptops and etc. And you don't want to, having the tether line can restrict your movements quite a bit for the photographer. So yeah, it's a balance really. But for beauty shoots, the model tends to be stationary, so you don't actually have to, if you can do tether, then I think that's a good thing to do. I've actually only started doing tethering for about maybe last half a year or something like that, a bit more than that probably, but yeah, since I've started doing it, I think it's just super useful. So Nima, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So the question was, do you think there's that a good looking model with makeup on is what produces a good picture? Well, yeah, I mean, a good picture, there's a lot of things that defines a good picture. You see, firstly you got to look at the light quality, your posing. Eventually, I mean, if you got all those techniques spot on, you know how to use your camera, you know how to, set up your lighting, then the rest really boils down to a good, I'd say story, a good concept for your photo shoot. And that's why editorials tend to be a huge team process. You can't really do it on your own. And if you're a photographer and you're thinking, I'm going to do the styling, the makeup, the hair, I think, there's people who are experts, expert makeup artists. They're going to bring a lot more to your picture. They're the experts in the field. So it's always good to collaborate. Find people on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you connect with other people, and just make collaborations. Find something that you love, set up a mood board, and see who likes to collaborate, and that's how you kind of practice and get better pictures. And when you say a good looking model, I think partially it does help, because as you go as you go in more and more high end, you want to essentially, what you got to think about is you want to create work that looks high end, that looks like it can be in a magazine. Because ultimately, if a director who's going to be looking at your pictures, who's going to commission you for a shoot, they're going to think, well, is your work going to be good enough for their magazine or for their campaign? So you got to have work that looks the part, and it's kind of that saying of, fake it till you make it. So, as you do more and more of your personal projects, you're going to have better work, and then you can start approaching the makeup agencies, not makeup, model agencies, and they will then give you a package to have models to select from. And actually, it's not as hard as most people think, because they always have models who are new faces that need fresh pictures, for example, or they need the practice as well. So it's a kind of a mutual benefit. So it's definitely worth asking model agencies to get a package of models. So you can see down here, this is where the lighting becomes important. If you're using a beauty dish, it tends to be a little bit harsh. So when you're positioning the beauty dish high up and shooting, with the light above the model's eye, then you're going to get these bits of shadowy, contrasty areas where you're going to get more skin texture showing up and irregularities. So it's always going to be worth looking at this, and that's why sometimes you can use a reflector underneath the chin just to bring some shadow, fill in some of the shadows. But actually, when I did this shot, I quite like it to be a little bit more edgy feel to it, with a bit more contrasty, so I left it without a reflector. So I'm going to now speed up a little bit with the healing. So it's not too bad. It's just mainly the bigger bits that you can spot that you can heal up. And again, the heal brush is not only just for blemishes and spots. You can actually even out the tone of that skin area. And that actually helps your dodge and burn a bit later on as well. Okay, I think that looks reasonable. So I'm going to turn that curve layer off, then you can see what I've done here. And sometimes, the curve layer obviously makes it more darker, the lighter area show up a bit better, but it can miss out the more shadowy area. So double check again. I think it looks pretty much alright. The other thing you've got to think about is obviously the other parts of the image. So not only the face, got to retouch the hair, so I can see a hair clip here, a hair clip there. So it's just worth, paying really detailed attention to these things if you can. Again, this clip here is quite distracting because the light is reflecting on that, so I literally just grab an area over here and just heal that part. And then a bit of makeup on the hair. These are the bits that you really need to look at. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. Right, so I can actually get rid of that layer, but I'll probably use it later on. I'll make another one. So for me, I actually already have actions that I've created in the past, and I've always followed this kind of workflow. Everyone will develop their own as they go along of learning how to retouch, but this is how I used to how I used to do it, and I haven't really changed huge amounts since then. I already made this action for what we call frequency separation, but the more I've started doing retouching, the less I've done the frequency separation. Mainly because I find it takes away the skin texture too much, and I feel that the skin becomes too fake at that point. So, I mean, for quick retouching, you might just use frequency separation, especially if it's not a beauty shot and it's a bit further out. But I kind of leave that. I've done it now, so I don't really use it anymore. So next layer I do is the dodge and burn. This is where the main workhorse is. Dodge and burn, you can spend hours doing it, and this is where the detail comes from. It's about maintaining skin texture, but cleaning and evening out the skin. But not only the skin, you can actually do a lot with that on the makeup as well. So I'll show you how to do that. So I've really made my dodge and burn on a 50% grey layer. And I know there's loads of different ways of dodge and burn. Some people make 2 separate layers, one on kind of the highlights and one on the shadows. But I find this method for me is quicker, because I essentially just dodge and burn on one layer, and I can do dodge and burn at the same time, simply by just pressing Alt on my keyboard, and I can do burn one area. So looking out for far first, because you can just do a general dodge and burn here. So O on my keyboard is the dodge button. So again, I can change the size of my brush. At the moment, you can see I'm doing dodging on mid-tones on exposure of 15%. So you don't want to go too high, but you can change it if you if you feel that you need to do a lot. But it's always better to do little and then go do a bit more if you need, rather than go over the top. So I actually quite like dodge and burning the hair. You can see the highlights and the shadows, and these are the areas that really gives your photo a depth. So I tend to just very gently dodge the lighter area, and burn some of the darker area. Again, it's very hard, when you're doing it, you probably don't see much difference, but at the end, when you toggle the final images, and you'll really see how much difference is made. I mean, on this image, it's not really a hair shot, so it's not a huge, it doesn't have to do too much to it. So now, I think the forehead doesn't look too bad, so maybe just a little bit here. So my first pass really is just looking at the image overall, without going into too much of the detail at the start. Yeah, so very good question. So the question was, whenever you do a shoot, you're only supposed to submit one picture for an assignment, and you spend hours retouching it to perfection, and then you're left with other pictures that you need to retouch and make them look like the ones before. Yes, I mean, that's always been, when I actually started, I always questioned, how do you make an editorial? An editorial means that every picture in your set has to connect with each other. You have to look at, one is the color tone, the mood of it, etc. But if you are just doing one picture at a go and then having to do more later on, I would always keep the Photoshop file, because then you can see what you've done. And I'll show you what I do in terms of toning, because you can literally just paste the toning layer to another picture, and you'll get a very similar kind of tone between pictures. The other thing that I started really doing since I've started using Capture One is the workflow. I'll show you in another tutorial, because at the moment I've exported this from Lightroom. But with Capture One, what you can do is edit straight on Photoshop in Capture One, and then bring it back into Capture One, and you'll see all the edited pictures without toning. And then you can put all the pictures side by side and then tone them all at the same time, which means that you can see the overall view of your story. So it's about, if you've got it's about putting pictures side by side and comparing it with each other. It is quite tedious, but you can always have one picture that is your base of your mood, essentially, of your colors, etc. Then you can use that as a reference. Does that make sense? So what I'm doing here really for the dodge and burn, so you can actually, I should turn this history on. You can see what I'm doing in terms of the dodging and burning. So you can see areas that are a bit light and blotchy, then I will darken those. If they are a bit darker and it's supposed to be light, then I will dodge those areas. So it's about evening that color tone. So we will probably go into more details into here in a bit, but this is just a general. And you got to remember, if you are going in retouching in like 100% zoom, then you lose the whole view of the picture, and you can make the skin too edited in that sense. So always just zooming in and out is always useful, just to review how much you're doing and what areas you're retouching really. So we can just toggle this on and off and just see how much I've done. So you can barely see it really, but actually if I create a curve layer, drop down my brightness, then I'll show you can see that actually that dodge and burn area has already done quite a bit. Okay. Again, don't forget other areas. I've done overall very briefly on the face, but the neck area, you want to try and even out some of the skin areas. Again, this is one common area that I've seen people overdo. The neck naturally has creases, so you don't want to overdo it. But just anything that is just too distracting, bumps here with the shadow from the lighting. And really, you're trying to perfect your picture from what you've got from the camera, really. So it's important really to get all the lighting right as much as possible within reason. And that's how I think for photographers who are learning to retouch, it's a really good thing, because you actually learn what you can correct in post and what you can't, and it just gives you that leeway of doing things when you're shooting. Alright, so now I think I'm going to go in more detail. Let's go in and have a look. So again, all this, the skin texture here, it doesn't bother me too much, especially if you once I've turned this off, this is very natural, this is natural skin, so why, you don't have to overdo it, you don't have to make it look plastic. Some people actually go all the way in like this, and yeah, you can do, I suppose, but at the end result is that you end up with a picture that is really smooth. But that could be a style that you want, or some people want a picture with that sort of smoothness, then that's absolutely fine. It's just the way you want your picture to be. And I do recommend, in terms of working out how much you should retouch and shouldn't, is just go look at magazines, see what they're doing, just look at the image and try and decipher what they've done, how they light the picture, look at the model's eyes, look at the catch lights, and you can learn a lot about how they lit the picture. And that's how, and then you can actually go away and try to imitate that lighting. So it's quite good in that sense. It's just try and error, really. So I mean, the hair, you can see here, it's quite a lot of things going on here, but this is natural. You're not going to get a strand of hair coming down like this with no other hair. I think it will look odd, so I decided to probably not do too much to it. I might have to at the end liquidify and bend this in slightly, but we'll deal with that a bit later on. But essentially, just trying to even out some of the bits underneath here. So you can see I'm actually burning some of the brighter bits, and again dodging the areas that are a bit more shadowy. And sometimes if you struggle to get certain bits that are a bit more precise, then zoom in, and by all means just zoom in and retouch those bits. I didn't say what kind of retouching pad I was using. So actually, funny enough, I've been using the first kind of desktop tablet that I've been using since I've ever started retouching, and actually is a really rubbishy. This is the retouching tablet I'm using, and surprisingly, it's lasted me for a good 4 years. And I still use the same thing, and if you look at all my pictures, that's all been produced using this tablet. I mean, once this breaks, I'm probably going to upgrade, but it's about knowing what to retouch and how to retouch it, rather than the tools, I suppose. So if you're just starting out, you don't need a really expensive tablet. Just try it out first, see if you like it. Learn how to use the tablet, learn how to use your pen, etc. And then upgrade from there. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Any questions so far? So yeah, if you're a retoucher, and you'll know that beauty retouching takes a lot more time than a normal fashion picture, or a portrait crop that's a bit further out. And I think you should, charge your clients accordingly because of that, because it takes a lot of time. I used to do a bit of retouching on Fiverr, and people ask for beauty retouching for £5, and I'm just saying, this is not doable. You can't. It just, so much effort has to go through into a beauty picture. Yes, I do sharpen the dice, but that's a bit later on down my workflow. So at the moment, my steps are kind of cleaning out the skin, making it even, making it as smooth within reason, and then after that you do the fine tuning as to, you know, sharpening, color correction, toning, etc. And in this image I already exported it as a crop, but if I was doing a full editorial, I would actually edit the whole picture without it being cropped, because if you think about when you're sending off to a magazine, they might want to use the different crop. They might use you got to think about the bleeding edges for a magazine as well. So they want a bigger picture to put into to make the magazine. So I always start shooting, you know, wider crops, making sure you got enough room to play with in post. So let's, again, you can always toggle the layout on and off and just see what you've done. It's always good to, you know, go back and review what we've been doing. Do you guys all use Photoshop? Let me tell you a bit about editing the eye. So I think when I started, I learned, you know, you'll see some tutorials on makeup, and you will, I mean, for girls they probably know a bit more about makeup than guys, but for photography actually it's a good idea just to learn, understand how makeup works and what actually makes it nice and what doesn't, and where it should be light and where it should be dark. And always, you know, when you're doing your shoot, communicate with your makeup artist so you're on the same page and know how the makeup should look. Okay. So I mean, this makeup artist Anna, absolutely fantastic. You know, you can just see this is flawless already. I hardly have to do anything to it. But you know, just find minor touches here and there. So sometimes these areas can be a bit more contrasty. You can see this bit here, that's a bit lighter, and this is dark, and that's purely, I mean, these are the natural crease of your eyelid, so I'd leave that alone. But this bit here can potentially just, you know, quite easily just dodge this bit and make it slightly darker. And you can zoom out, you can see the difference. Yeah. Cool. I'm not going to do too much to it, but again, zooming in and out always helps. Right, so this is the bit where you can start doing a bit more in terms of evening the skin texture. You can see some area that I can probably make this even darker and show you. Yeah, you can really see it now. All these bits here. Yeah, some of these bits here probably is a little bit more contrasty. So you can go in, dodge these areas. Again, these are all skin textures, but it's about reducing a little bit with your dodge and burning. You don't have to take it all away. Yeah, you can see the difference there. So I mean, you can literally spend, as long as you like doing those things, but you have to make the judgment as to how much retouching you need to do. I mean, nobody's skin is perfect, but it's about making it clean and not distracting. So I always change the brush size according to what I need to retouch. Again, we're coming to the area that looks a bit more contrasty because of the lighting, and you can see now I'm trying to do a bit more with the dodge and burning. You see the little bit of details that you do, at the end you'll see the results, because they all kind of add up eventually. And actually, for fashion photographs, when you're a bit more further away, sometimes dodging burning can, funny enough, change someone's model's expression on their face, purely just from changing the shadows on their face. It's really powerful, dodge and burning. Yeah, it can take a long time. You know, I think the longest I spent retouching one image, probably about 5-6 hours. And I guess sometimes you can, you know, do it bit by bit over different days, because you know eyes can get tired, and probably you get so accommodated to looking at the image that you start missing parts. So yeah, always take a break if you can. Have snacks or a drink with you when you're retouching. And I don't know if you guys like listening to music, but I find it really useful when I retouch. Just sometimes, especially if you're, you know, for editorials, you want to really get into the mood. If you're, you know, retouching a soft, you know, very feminine looking picture, then some soft music will get you into the mood. If it's very edgy, then, you know, it really helps, I find. Right, so I've done quite a bit there already, so I'll just show you the layers that I've been, so you can see the skin is a bit more even now. There's probably a little bit down here to do because I haven't done this side. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. think we're almost there. Okay, so again, with the dodge and burning, it gives you the definition, so I quite like to sometimes just dodge these areas here above the lips, just to give it a bit more depth. So you can see, if I toggle this layer on and off, the dodge and burn has actually done quite a bit. But if you haven't seen all this process, you probably wouldn't have noticed. You thought, this is the magic of dodge and burn, is so powerful. Okay, with that layer pretty much done, I'm not going to do too much to it now. With the makeup, you can actually make it accentuate a bit more. Let me just do these bit first. So again, you can even out the makeup side of things. Here is a bit lighter than the other bits, so I'll go ahead and just burn these areas down. And then zoom out a bit, and then the aim of this makeup really is to have it slightly darker on the outer edge, and then bright here, and then near the inner part of the eye is always a bit more lighter. So you can actually make the brush a bit bigger and just burn areas just to give it a bit more contrast. So I'm going to dodge this. Again, it's not a huge amount, you're not really changing the makeup, you're just fine tuning bits. So sometimes when you zoom out, you'll notice bits that you haven't noticed before, like on here, especially once I've taken the contrast layer off, this little bit looks a little bit uneven. Alright. And just to give her chin a bit more definition, what you can do is just lightly burn underneath the chin, and then slightly dodge. I mean, I've done too much there, so I'm going to go backwards. Again, always got to look over to the neck as well, all areas of your images. Made a mess out of that one. I'm gonna just go backwards, see what I've done there, and just go and redo it. Yeah, that's probably a bit better. Probably didn't need to do that bit. Okay, so that was before, and that's after. You can barely see it, but actually, if you toggle that on again, okay, just trying to make it smoother a little bit. And again, it's the whole image you're looking at, so even the jewelry here you can dodge and burn. By dodging something you actually give it a tiny bit more contrast. Burning something give it a bit more contrast, so I'm just going to burn this colour back in. And again, also this side. So this neck bit is bothering me. Alright, good. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this curve layer because we're done with it. We're just going to have a final look at the dodge and burning. So that's before, that's after. You can see actually that dodge and burn have really made a difference on this makeup over this area here. Yeah? Okay. So my next step is, as we talked about here, is the sharpening. So I already have a preset essentially. If I run this, I'll show you what's inside. So my eyes layer has a sharpening, darkening, whitening and brightening layers. The sharpening essentially is or as it says, just to sharpen that whatever details you want to sharpen. So I always sharpen the eyes if I could. So with this, it's already masked in a black mask layer, so it's not hasn't affected anywhere. So now I'm using a white brush. My flow is 34%, opacity 100. You can change it accordingly. I always have it slightly softer, so my hardness is about 35%. And you don't have to be very, careful about it. It's just essentially brushing on top of the eyes. So you can actually see, if I zoom in, if I toggle that on and off, you see what difference it's made. There. Alright. So again, it's not a huge, unless you zoom in and look at before and after, it's not that noticeable. And I actually quite like also, wherever there's contrasting areas, you can also sharpen. So if there's any edge bits, then I would sharpen those. I mean, that's already quite a little bit blurry because that's the way I've taken the shot, so I leave that alone. You can sharpen around the eyelashes if you want, but I think I quite like it softer in this picture, so I'm going to leave it alone. And same with hair, you can sharpen hair. Okay. Darken depends if you've got a model with very, a bright iris, then you can actually you can darken the edge of it just to bring it out a bit more. Or if they have a dark eyeliner, you can actually bring it out a bit more. But for this image, I'm not going to need to use the darkening tool. Eye whitening. Again, if their eyes is a bit bloodshot or something, or red, you can use it. I tend to actually use it more for teeth, so it's for teeth whitening rather than eye lightening. Again, it's a brush layer. I just make the teeth whiter. The brightening I tend to use, especially if it's a beauty shot. For this, I'm using a brush, again, same opacity and flow. You can see what I'm doing is just brightening the inner part of the iris. So if I toggle it on and off, it's very subtle, very subtle. And if I show you the whole eye layer, yeah, there we go. Now, some people do take away these veins in the eyes, but I think maybe this one is a tiny bit more distracting, which we can get rid of later on. The other thing I spotted is this area here is a little bit uneven, so I'm going to go back to my dodge and burn area and sort that bit out. So you can see what I've done there. Yeah, actually, back to the question earlier about makeup. What I do find, one thing that is very, very tricky to edit is mascara, especially if they are quite bitsy. This one's is okay, but you can see this, for example, here. It's not too noticeable, but they sometimes need editing. Okay. So just a tiny bit there. So you'll find that, with your workflow, you might come back and forth, you might go back and re-edit something, and that's absolutely fine. Just whatever you spot, you've got the option to go back and do it. And sometimes with your dodge and burn, it really can help the makeup really accentuate its purpose. So the blend of it, you can really make it blend really nicely through dodge and burn. Right, pretty happy with that so far. So that's pretty much it for that layer. So the next step I tend to is make a full copy. So I push Control Shift Alt and E. What that does is make a completely copy of the layer, all the layers, and then what I tend to do is just group those last bits here, which you don't need anymore really, and you can then see what you've done overall. Okay, so with this layer here, you can actually go back to, if you spotted any parts that need healing brush, then you can go back and do it. Or if you need to liquidify anything, this is the point where I'll start doing that. So in this image here, I find this bit of hair is a bit funny, so I'm going to try and liquidify that out. So I've gone to liquidify. And then you essentially just pushing parts. You can always undo by using this reconstruction tool, just to make it go back if you want. If you think you've done too much. I mean, for this particular image, I think the small hairs you can leave alone. So you can see before and after. Just tiny adjustments. and maybe here I could fill out some of those hair here. So use the stamp tool. I'm going to make it quite small and just fill in those missing parts in here just to make it a bit fuller. You know, when you zoom out like this, you're really not going to see that big difference. So I'm going to go ahead actually to liquidify it a bit even more. Too much. And you can use the freezing panel here, freeze mask tool, to freeze parts that you don't want to move anymore. So if I do this and I just want to move this bit here, I mean, with the liquidify tool, you can only do so much with it. If you do drastic liquidifying, then your picture gets almost like smudged. So it's only for minor adjustments, really. So you can see that is what we've done, and before, after. Okay, so before, after, the next step that I do is toning. So I have a toning action here. I'll show you what's inside each toning layer. So I have a pop layer. The pop layer makes the image a bit contrasty. Essentially, it's essentially a pre-made curve layer, which makes it a bit more contrasty, and we can toggle that on and off. You can see a slight difference, just makes it pop out a bit more. And if it's too much, then I change the opacity here to a bit less. I mean, again, it's very minute changes, but all changes that you made add up to your final picture. So the next part where most of the toning comes in is your adjustment layer on the color balance. So you can see there's a shadow, mid-tone and highlights. I rarely touch the highlights. It's mainly just shadows and mid-tone area. So shadows, a lot of the fashion images use kind of dark blue in their shadows and makes it a little bit more contrasty. Or if you want it warmer, you can use a red shadow tone. And don't forget, you can actually mix it with other colours to give the effect that you want. But for this image, because it's beauty, I'm going to do very minimal. I'm going to give it a tiny bit of blue. Sometimes even, you know, +4, +5 is enough. So you can see it's not huge difference, but I don't actually quite like this green. I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so that's all the shadows that I want. Midtones again, you can make it warmer, you can make it cooler. Again, toggle it on and off to see what you've done. Basically what I've done is just made it a bit more contrasty. But so back to your question earlier on, is making pictures same tone and the same throughout your story. You can basically, this toning group, you can literally drag onto a different picture and you'll get that same tone effect. If you want that consistency in terms of your toning. So let's see what we've done here. It's pretty good. Okay, I think that's pretty much done. So the one final thing that I sometimes do, not always, but again, make it another layer. This is your final layer, which you can see the difference. Sometimes I do this and go to camera raw filter. Okay, and what that does is that through this tool here, you can readjust your brightness, contrast, etc. as you have done at the start in, for example, Lightroom or in Capture One. So you can do your another adjustment. You can see you can really go over the top with these. And you will see in some, it depends on what you want to do and what kind of effect you want. Some pictures are very contrasty in the sense that they really bring up the highlight to almost, you'll see in the magazines where the white on the skin, some highlight areas almost white and you can hardly see, but you can still preserve, you know, the details even though it's quite bright. And this is all kind of down to your own preference. And you basically just got to play around and do your sliders and see how much you want. So again, you can toggle the preview and to see what you've done. So it's probably a little bit too bright for me. So good. happy with that. And I mean, there's a lot of things you can play around. You can make a new another layer just to for example, if I want to make this yellow a bit more vibrant, I use my hue saturation layer, use your eyedrop tool and select the yellow, and then you can play around with different, I mean that's awfully too much. This is the hue. You can, if you want to change the color, this is how you do it, but I'm going to leave that alone. But I might want to just make it a bit more yellow. This is too much. That's probably about right. Good. I think that's pretty much it. So we'll go and have a look at my final picture. So this is the picture. Oh, too much. This is the final image, and this is before and after. And all the tiny bit of changes throughout your adjustments actually makes a big difference right at the end. Okay, and if I go into more detail, right, there we go. I hope that was useful. Let me know if you have any questions and can leave some comments. And if there's more different things you want to see in the future, again, leave me comments. You can contact me on Instagram, Facebook, and we can try and do some different tutorials, whatever you guys need. Maybe even tutorials or a run through of how I cull my pictures, how I select pictures for magazines. Yeah, just let me know.